Last time, we began listing some of the problems that institutions have when they try to develop their self-study through this steering committee plus subcommittees approach. This time, we'll look at more problems that can arise with this model for preparing the submission, and then in the next blog, we will look at a much better approach. I want to start with managing complexity because it's important to recognize that a large number of people will be required in order to populate these subcommittees. I mean, let's suppose that we have just 5 people on each, and suppose there are 11 standards. That's 55 people already, without counting the steering committee. Of course, often that won't make matters worse because it will be quite natural to have the steering committee composed of the chairs of the subcommittees, or at least among its members. Although it is worth noting in passing that having all the chairs of the subcommittees is both an advantage and a disadvantage for the steering committee. The advantages are obvious in terms of reporting on what's been discussed and what's been achieved, but the main disadvantage is that we really need the steering committee to be a third eye, to be able to look at progress with a fresh perspective without the direct involvement. Otherwise, the meetings may end up just being squabbles over the length of each of the sections among people who've all got a vested interest in preserving their own hard-won achievements. One university that I work with has 3 campuses and activities in a single subject on all of those 3 campuses. And in preparing for their self-study, they set up subcommittees for each standard on each of the 3 campuses. That's a total of 33 committees, around 150 people. The process rapidly became completely unmanageable, as you can imagine. In this case, one of the 3 subcommittees per standard had to act as an intermediate steering committee that was responsible for bringing the 3 draft sections together into one hopefully coherent narrative account, an almost impossible task that certainly created a lot of unhappiness and tension, as repetitious material from, say, Campus 2 was deleted in favour of similar material on Campus 3. Just keeping this process moving forward productively is a massive issue for the steering committee. And note that as a steering committee, its main function is in fact to steer, that is, to manage the process and making sure that it's efficient and effective. I now want to turn to the topic of focus, the focus of the subcommittees, because the purpose of the self-study is not singular. There are several things that the self-study needs to do, and we'll look at that in a future post. But importantly, it's supposed to be self-critical and reflective. It's not simply a description of what happens. It should demonstrate through evidence that the institution knows what's happening and responds, when necessary, to issues, problems, changing circumstances, with remedial or improved approaches. Understanding this and knowing how to deal with it properly is not necessarily widely shared across a large institution. It's the sort of thing that those who are involved directly in quality in some form are aware of, but not necessarily everyone else. As a consequence, those who are charged in the subcommittee for writing the narratives don't know necessarily what they're supposed to do. And because of this, they tend to write a lot of approach, that is, describing what's done in the institution, possibly providing some evidence for this in supplementary materials in the annexes, but very little in the way of evaluation of the approach, with results, and next to nothing in terms of areas of improvement, what's been done following assessment to follow up on areas of concern. And similarly, there'll probably be a lack of attention to identify areas that need to be improved and why this is the case. These matters, though, are the core contribution of the self-study. Anyone can make claims about what they do and hopefully demonstrate that they actually do it, but fewer people can provide evidence that they're reflecting on what they do, gathering evidence, evaluating the evidence, and demonstrating there's been some kind of improvement. One client of mine is a leading research university, so they felt very confident with their draft self-study in the area of research. It was a very, very long and very full of self-congratulatory material on their research achievements. Of course, the people selected to be on the subcommittee were those who themselves were high achievers in research and knew most about what was going on. The problem is that these external quality audits and accreditations, they're not assessing research quality per se, they're measuring the institution against its mission, against relevant international and national standards. And particularly, they want to see that the institution has a clear approach, which is put into practice, which is assessed against institutional targets, properly resourced to ensure this, and that strategy is adjusted where the evidence suggests that this is necessary. It was a real problem getting my client to see that listing what were internationally excellent, even world-leading achievements in research did not address the standards fully. And this is also a problem that arises because those on the subcommittees do not necessarily properly understand what's actually required of them. Now, if there's just one problem I hope you'll remember from these posts on preparing a self-study, then let this be one. It's far harder to revise a mess than it is to get it right first time. The approach that we're discussing, which I've repeatedly said is the most common approach taken to preparing a self-study, is an approach that is based on getting it right second time, and maybe this is the crucial weakness of the approach. In the end, once the subcommittees have washed their hands of their responsibilities, the steering committee ends up with nothing to steer, but instead a large, incoherent, inconsistent, incomplete, contradictory mess. They then have to turn themselves into a writing committee. But they're not doing that work for the first time. They have this large document which they try somehow to rescue from its major flaws. They're trying to get it right second time. And then, if I may add a personal complaint, that's when they send for me. And I wish so much that they had called earlier, because if they had, I would have told them that there is a better way to write the self-study. And so, in the next post on a slightly different topic, how to develop a self-study, part 1, we will start by being really positive and discuss a much better way forward.